In my first book, there's a part where the character of Anna, who's the witness, again, it's fictional, it's not me, but I did use elements of my own feelings as a witness. She's describing it to Nick, who's the protagonist, who's not a witness. And she's talking about being in the religion, and she describes it as it's like being in a room where everyone is dancing, but you can't hear the music.
Hello there, I'm Lloyd Evans. Welcome to Ramocro. As many of you know, I enjoy having fellow ex-Jehovah's Witnesses on the channel, and every now and then I get to interview fellow ex-Jehovah's Witness authors. Today is no exception. I am delighted to welcome Jodie Chapman. Hello, Jodie.
Hello, Lloyd.
So today is quite a big day, it being April the 13th. We're obviously recording this in advance, but this interview will go out on April 13th, which is the release date for your fabulous new book, Oh Sister, which you've very kindly sent me a copy of. What an amazing book, and how exciting it must be to be getting it out there into the ether.
Yeah, thank you. I wrote Oh Sister about 3 years ago now, like just into the first lockdown. So it feels like I wrote it a very long time ago. But I mean, publishing does move at like a glacial pace. But I was 2 years ahead of deadline for that book because I wanted to get it written before my first book came out. So I worked hard to do that. So yes, and it's odd now talking about it and publicizing it because it just feels like I did it a very long time ago.
Yeah, feels like almost cheating, something that you did ages ago, and it's just been kind of almost collecting dust.
Yeah.
But suffice to say, I mean, I've just started reading it, and you know, it's gorgeously written, and the stories and narratives that I'm already kind of losing myself in are just as relevant now as they would have been when you started penning them. Talk us through, you know, what prompted you to write this particular book. So just to be clear, this is not autobiographical. It is a novel based on basically three principal characters. That's fair, isn't it?
Yes. So a little bit of background. So my first book came out with Penguin 2 years ago, and I wrote that is Another Life. I've set up a little library behind me just here.
There we go.
So Another Life, which this was the hardback cover, and then this is the paperback. So that was, in a nutshell, it was a story about love, but essentially it was a love story between a man and a woman, and she was a witness. I mean, I never actually completely named the religion in it. I did in my author's note in the back, but she came from what I called in the book as a doomsday religion, and he was not. So it was the story of their relationship over a period of 20 years. And then after I wrote that one, I really wanted to write something that was very female focused, something focused on women. And when I came to write the book, to write Oh Sister 3 years ago, I was well in the process of sort of fading out from being a witness and writing these three women. So the story is about it's about three women who are within the confines of a doomsday religion, which I have changed the name of the religion in the book, which, as I say at the very beginning, is out of respect to my mum, who is still an active witness.
That's in the opening pages. Yeah.
So
author's note: out of respect for my mother, I've changed the name of the religion. Out of respect for myself, I have written this book.
Yeah, so it was really important to me through the whole process of sort of fading out from the religion. It was really important to me that I retain my voice. And especially, I think, being a woman, someone who's grown up in a faith that has taken away my voice for pretty much all my life, it was important to me that I was able to stand up and say, this is what I think, or I don't know what I think, but I'm okay with not knowing. That's part of the beauty of life. But writing this book allowed me to sort of explore my feelings through these fictional three women. So the religion is not Jehovah's Witnesses. They're called the Disciples of the Last Days. And each of these three women go through things that I have never gone through. And yet they're very different, but they all are in the process of finding their own voices, finding their agency, and in one way or another, they are put out of the religion. And so they have to really come to terms with who they are as people. So it was really important to me to write something that was female focused, especially after my first book, Another Life, was first person novel from the perspective of a man. I wanted this one to be much more about the women.
Fantastic, because obviously, this is a religion where when you are a woman, I mean, not that I've had that experience, but the experience of a woman is very, very different to the experience of a man, isn't it? So I think it's really, really important to, for writers like yourself who have this gift of helping to unpack this perspective. I think it's very, very important that you do so. I think the inside cover kind of sums things up very nicely. If you don't mind, I'll just read it. I'm trying to kind of avoid spoilers. Meet Isabel, Jen, and Zelda, 3 women whose bodies and minds are not their own. They belong to the church. Life and death decisions are taken by others on their behalf, who they might marry, whether they start a family. Isabel and Jen know nothing of the world, but when Isabel's husband leaves her and Jen challenges those in charge, the church turns its back on them. Zelda, never one for doing what is expected, dares to find hope on the outside. Meet Isabel, Jen, and Zelda, 3 women desperate to find a life to call their own. This is a novel about what it is like to live inside a prison of the mind and how to break out of it if you can. So if that doesn't whet the appetite, I don't know what will. So important again that these voices are reflected.
Yeah, and I think what's been really interesting to me is that the reaction from early readers it's been really strange, because even though I've been out of this kind of environment, the witness environment, for a number of years now, it still feels, I grew up in it. It was just so normal to me. And so early readers have been calling it like a dystopian horror story, but one that is taking place right now. And people are describing it as, I was so angry when I was reading this. It made me so mad. And when I first started reading these reviews, I was a bit like, oh, really? Like, is that the same book I wrote? Because I didn't think of it as being like that. And it wasn't until I read the perspective of people who've read it, who knew nothing about this world, that I suddenly thought, wow, isn't it interesting how we excuse abusive practices just because they're normal to us, just because we've grown up in them and we just think that they're normal. That you could be taken into the back room and spoken to about how short your hair is as a woman, or you'd be told off for wearing trousers on the ministry. I mean, just such odd, strange little rules that you have to live your life by. And it was just interesting to me, the response from worldly people who would just say, this is just terrifying, this is happening in plain sight. So it's been an education for me, not just writing the book, but also just the response that it's receiving.
I think, what you want as a writer is you want a response, don't you? The worst thing in the world would be for people to be indifferent or, lacking any kind of emotional response. So I guess anger is a sign that it's resonating with people, and that you have found a way of kind of clicking the button of people's emotions. But yeah, I agree with you. The things that we experienced, we spent years or decades in some cases having these things normalized. So for someone to kind of come at these practices, like you say, being dragged into the back room and questioned on intimate matters, for someone to come at these from a perspective of total ignorance, it is going to be, how on earth does this happen? But it is happening all the time. And I think it's really important for people like yourself who have the gift of being good writers to be able to convey this to people, because, just someone, there's always value in people sharing their stories, but sometimes, it needs, the weight of a longer story that people can immerse themselves in for this to kind of drive home, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely, definitely.
So, are you? It sounds like you're still fairly early in the whole stage of extricating yourself fully. Even the fact that you've not been able to mention the group by name. Are you nervous about any kind of backlash from those who knew you as a Jehovah's Witness once this goes out?
I don't think so. I mean, I think I definitely felt the nerves more with my first book, because although that wasn't written from the perspective of the character of Anna, who was the one who was a witness in the novel, it still felt very, in a way, I suppose, I mean, controversial is such a ridiculous word when talking about this, because it's just a creative project. It's not real. It's a work of fiction. But I think because you're so raised to have this idea that anything that is written down in print about witnesses or alluding to witnesses is evil, that even the act of doing it was very cathartic for me. And it felt, I felt in a way like I was doing something that not that it wasn't right, because I felt very much that it was the right thing for me to do. But I just knew that it would be shocking to people, and it was shocking to people. And I did, certain family members who are still active witnesses, I don't really have anything to do with them anymore. But I was kind of prepared for that happening, and I think that would have happened anyway, just from me sort of no longer being an active witness. Those relationships would have suffered anyway. So for me, it was more important to me that I have my creative freedom, that I use my voice in a way that I feel is right. So when I started writing this book, at first I did use the name of the group. I did say Jehovah's Witnesses. But as the book went on, and when I'd finished the book and I read it, I felt this sort of, I did feel angry on behalf of these women, and it made me furious as I was writing it. It brought up a lot of memories and things that I had been trying to move on from. But ultimately, my mum is an active witness, and one of my sisters is still an active witness, and I do have, a semi sort of close relationship with her. And I ultimately decided that I also don't want to be the Jehovah's Witness writer, if that makes sense. Like, it's important for me that I've extricated myself from that world, that for my own good, I want to move on from it. And I want to write books in future that have nothing to do with this. So I've just finished the first draft of my third book, because I have another 2-book deal with Penguin, and it's got nothing to do with witnesses. It's got nothing to do with religion at all. And that's important to me, that I'm moving on, and I'm, the light gets brighter and I'm heading in that direction. So I've got nothing but respect for someone like yourself, who it's your work to constantly still be engaging with the organisation and with the literature they put out. I mean, I think that mentally, I don't know if I could handle that. I think I would find that very hard. And I feel like I have been in this sort of limbo of, at the same time, feeling connected to it in a way, and at the same time sort of just wanting to just not be connected with it at all anymore. It's a really strange thing, because it's so wrapped up in our emotional DNA, isn't it? We were born, we grew.
You just described the last 12 years of my life.
Yeah. It's a really strange place to feel like you're using your voice, but at the same time, you're still in that world. So I think for me, and also I'm a chicken, basically. I don't want to hurt my mum. So that's partly why I have not mentioned the name of the group, because I don't consider myself.
You're not a chicken.
Well, it's hard though, isn't it? Because on the one hand, I think, like I mentioned in my author's note at the back, I don't mention the group by name, but I say the religion I was raised in, and how in the book there is an event that happens. And I used the Australian Royal Commission, the document from that, as my research. And reading that document made me so angry. It made me so angry when I read it. And so what happens to one of the characters in the book is very much, I wanted it to mirror the practices of how that religion treated child sex abuse victims, you know, how they were interviewed. They couldn't have someone there with them. They couldn't have a woman there with them. It was, you know, you think that these would have been very, very young girls. These would have been children. And they're there facing 3 men. And then they've got to repeat what, you know, the person they're accusing has to be in the room with them while they repeat it. I mean, it's just crazy. And it just made me feel very angry reading it. So it's strange, because on the one hand, I want to write this because I think it's important. But then on the other hand, there is that cowardly part of me that is also sort of, you know, my relationship with my mum is important to me, and I don't want to needlessly upset her.
Mm-hmm. No, that makes sense. I think you've honestly just got to navigate these things as best you can, because life's complicated, isn't it? And, you know, human relationships, I often say, are basically what define us. And, you know, you've just got to, quite frankly, what I'm saying is you don't owe the universe anything. The very fact that you've managed to write 2 books, you're saying that this is the last one. I secretly hope that at some point in the future you revisit this topic. But even if this is the last one, you know, this is just a bonus as far as I'm concerned, because just making it out of this kind of toxic group, you know, with your marbles, quite frankly, is a huge accomplishment. So for you to make it out with your marbles and with 2 books, I mean, your first book, Another Life, it was chosen by BBC Two between the covers. So, you know, you're already a writer with something of a track record who's using her skills to shine a light on an area, kind of a subset of society that people know nothing about.
I was really lucky with the Between the Covers pick, because it's a Sarah Cox hosts a book club show on BBC. It's BBC One or BBC Two, I can't remember, where her and a group of 4 celebrities, they consider a book that week, and Another Life was one of them. And I was so nervous leading up to the show, because I wondered, are they going to, you know, are they going to enjoy the book even on an enjoyment level? And also, what are they going to say about the religious aspect of it? And they spent quite a while talking about the religious aspect. And I put a quote, a part of this on my Instagram page, a part of the video, which it made me so happy, where they were talking about it, and they said they were talking about the practice, the shunning practice.
Maybe we could show that clip if that's possible.
Yeah, I mean, is that BBC are fine, aren't they? Because what's the expression? They'd be fine, sure, right, with crediting it.
We can show just a brief clip. So if Tibor is gracious, a clip will appear now.
Okay, brilliant. Okay.
What I really enjoyed, actually, was that was the sort of the double life aspect of it. And it did, I mean, I had relatively religious upbringing, but an incredibly liberal one. So none of those things really applied in my life. But when talking about her breaking free, I spent quite a lot of time thinking, oh, how awful for the parents, actually.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, awful for everyone, isn't it? Because you're absolutely constrained, and you don't feel that you can make contact with your own children because they have left.
Yeah.
I mean, just awful. And I can't imagine anyone doing it.
Yeah.
Really. I know I could not live my life like that.
The heartache must be brutal.
Yeah.
I thought that was done really sensitively, though. Like, because we know that Jodie, in the after bit, she talks about the fact that she was a Jehovah's Witness. It's done in a really sensitive way, that she doesn't write the book and is bad-mouthing a religion or anything like that. I think it's still done in a respect.
But they all said in there how respectful I was about the religion. They all said about how terrible the shunning practice was, but also that I wasn't being too angry about it, as in I wasn't, you know, mudslinging at the religion. And that was important to me. I wanted to show both sides, because, you know, witnesses aren't essentially bad people. There are bad practices, and of course there are a few rotten eggs, as there are anywhere, but ultimately I don't want to become someone, having been raised in a faith that painted one side as good is, one side as bad is, and brought me up with this very black and white thinking that I think is very damaging. I don't want to then leave that and still be that same person, but have flipped it round. Like, how would I have gone through any kind of growth as a human being, evolved at all in terms of who I am, if I was to just simply repeat those practices? Like, I have no interest in that. And so that was important to me, that in the book that I wrote it, and so that if a witness read it, they would not feel, in a way, I wouldn't want them to feel defensive about it necessarily, because it's not like what ex-witness, the ex-witness mentality is painted as being to witnesses, which is they're evil, it's Satan wrapped up in, that they want to say terrible things about us. I didn't want it to be like that, because I wanted to challenge that thinking that anything that is critical is automatically terrible. And I hope that came across. So I was really happy when that was on TV, broadcast across the country. And I had a lot of messages from ex-witnesses as well, which was really heartwarming, actually, just people saying that they found it really, really helpful. It was something that they really enjoyed. They felt seen, basically, which is really important to me.
Wonderful. What a great feeling. I'm just mindful as well, because I want to kind of labor a little bit on, one of the main reasons for you writing Oh Sister, which is to share the female perspective. Obviously, I will always be limited in fully understanding the female perspective. I don't think you can understand it fully unless you've been through the organisation as a woman. But, just hypothetically speaking, if someone were watching this video, let's say it's someone who is a man and he's either still in the organisation or has recently exited and doesn't see that there's a huge difference between the way between the male and the female experience of being in Jehovah's Witnesses, what would you have to say regarding the female experience and how it differs from the male experience? And because obviously you've shared that perspective in this book, and I'm interested if you could somehow condense that perspective into almost like an elevator pitch, what would it be?
Oh, you've put me on the spot. I think what's always struck me as a woman was how, however good I could have been at public speaking, however good I could have been at reading aloud or teaching people, to know that my ability to, I'm not going to say rise through the ranks, because it's not an ambition thing, but even just to be heard would always come secondary to the ability of a completely average man. So a brother who was terrible at public speaking, the number of public talks I had to sit through, where, especially when it was a visiting brother from another hall who was terrible at giving talks, but because the group of elders in their hall didn't have the guts to just say, listen, mate, this isn't your skill is somewhere else. Because they couldn't say that, they would let that person then go to other halls and give all these long old talks. And I would listen to people sort of reading the Watchtower aloud and just thinking, I don't massively enjoy public speaking, but English was always my skill at school. It was something I always loved, drama. And I would just sit there and just think, I can't do that because I don't have a penis. It sounds so stupid, but it is so stupid that ultimately my ability to be heard, it would all come down to genitalia. And that is so bonkers to me that I'm not putting it in a nutshell, am I, Lloyd, at all? That's not condensed.
No, I actually prefer the longer version. It's important that this gets heard, yeah.
But it's hard. It's those tiny, banal things like you can't wear trousers on the ministry or at the meeting. even though, firstly, trousers are surely more modest than seeing someone's legs, surely. And also women were allowed to wear trousers the rest of the time. So if it's that they're considered masculine, well, why does the scripture only apply for 2 hours on a Tuesday night and not at 6 o'clock on the Tuesday?
How is it only cross-dressing if it's in the Kingdom Hall, but not all other times?
Exactly. I mean, it's just all those little things that you just think, oh, come on, really? And how the number of times I'd have to sit there at a talk and listen to them talking about, oh, there was a quick build, and, even the sisters got involved. Even the sisters were able to use a drill. And like these patronizing comments all the time, or it was always the sisters that were making the cakes. And it was always really hard for me because I grew up, I can't cook. I'm a terrible cook. I don't enjoy all the chores that come with having a house, being a grown-up. Don't enjoy any of that. And my life, as I saw it, being in that world, was that was my place. Like I had to, and it wasn't as if the men could obviously go out and have these big careers or anything like that, but it was still, a man was able to exist in a way that a woman couldn't. The best that a woman could hope for was that she could be a pioneer, which is basically unpaid labour, or she could be a circuit overseer's wife or something like that, always connected to the man. She could never be someone in her own right. And, I never understood that. And the character of Jezebel, the original title for Oh Sister was Jezebel. And basically my publishers were like, that's not the right title because it's too religious. A lot of people don't even know what Jezebel means. Whereas to me, I wanted to write it because it's used as this word that sort of paints any woman that steps out of line. And so actually my characters' names, Jen, Zelda and Isabel, the beginnings of their names all form the name Jezebel.
Oh, clever. Yeah.
So it's my little link to just keep to that title. But yeah, for me, as someone who isn't naturally sort of very subservient or very background, I've always been opinionated. I've always wanted to say what I think. It was hard for me growing up because I constantly thought, where do I fit in this world? Like, there must be something wrong with me because this is the truth and I'm not fitting into it. So it was never for me, I never had issues with it when I was younger to do with the religion. It was more to do with, I don't measure up, which of course is how that whole organization works, that whole belief system works, is about putting on the new personality. Don't be you, basically. You're born imperfect, you're born damaged, and you need to not be who you are, which of course is the opposite to what I now think and which experts say, which is to really be happy, you have to be your authentic self. But there is no authentic self in that world. It is all about who you are is not good enough. You need to be better. You need to be completely different. And you can't exist outside of the group. So as a woman growing up, as a girl growing up, I found it really hard to see where my place was.
Presumably you were baptized when you were, fairly young, or?
I was 19, so I was born into the faith, and I did actually try to leave it when I was 17. I wasn't baptized at the time, but it was made very clear to me by someone in my family that if I did leave, then they would have nothing to do with me, and I would have nothing to do with their children. And I have always had a real love for my family, and I couldn't do it. Basically, I couldn't leave. So it wasn't me thinking. I did think that's not fair because, of course, I'd been born into it. So they say they don't practice child baptism, but if you don't allow people to leave even when they're not baptized, then essentially you are practicing child baptism even without the water. So I didn't have the strength to leave then, so I stayed. And then I met my husband now, and we started going out. He was baptized and I wasn't. And I basically got baptized because you can't go out with a witness, can you, unless you're baptized. So it was something
you can't be unevenly yoked with an unbeliever or something like that.
Yeah. So I felt I had no choice. And of course I did have a choice, but I wasn't strong enough really to exercise that choice, because I'd never been raised. You're not raised to really think about standing up for yourself and setting foot out there and forging your own path. You know, that's very much, that is the road that leads to death. So so then I got baptized at 19. So I was an adult, but I did not get baptized for the right reasons.
No, would you say you were pressured into getting baptized?
I wouldn't. Do you know what? I would say that my decision on it was almost flippant. It was like, oh, okay, well, we want to go public with our relationship, so I need to get baptized then. It was just, you know, I was so in that world of it being just the next step, it being normality, that I didn't really give it much thought, which actually, looking back, I mean, the whole thing about how the elders' decisions are run by Holy Spirit, surely that brings it into question, because surely if it was run by Holy Spirit, they'd have been like, no, actually, you're being really flippant about this. We don't think you really believe it in your heart. And maybe I didn't. I mean, I don't know. I think I did believe it. I did have doubts, but the doubts were always about me. It was always about my inability to change myself, to put on that new personality. It was me that was the problem. It wasn't the faith. And in my first book, there's a part where the character of Anna, who's the witness, again, it's fictional, it's not me, but I did use elements of my own feelings as a witness. She's describing it to Nick, who's the protagonist, who's not a witness. And she's talking about being in the religion. And she describes it as, it's like being in a room where everyone is dancing, but you can't hear the music. And you have two choices in that moment. You can either dance along, because maybe it's you that's the problem and the music really is playing, but it's you that can't hear it. And one day, hopefully, you'll be able to hear it. Or you stand up and you just say, I don't hear it. And at 19, 17, I just did not have the strength to do that. So I just went along with it.
That's an amazing analogy. I love that. Yeah.
I just went along with it because of course, when you're a witness, your world is the witness world, which is so small. But to you, that is everything. That is not just normality, that is the world. Everything outside, out of the window, is not really real. It's all temporary. And so you know, it's how groups work, isn't it? And I think I just was too weak at the time. I didn't have the strength to really confront those doubts.
So you were baptized at 19, and as you've correctly pointed out, you know, the only sort of power of any kind that women in the Jehovah's Witness religion can aspire to is either being a pioneer or being the wife of someone important, or maybe, you know, going to Bethel, which is basically harder for women than it is for men. So were you ever in a situation where you reached the point where you felt you should be extending yourself in the congregation and maybe doing pioneering or anything like that, or were you kind of more on the periphery?
I've got to say, I was the laziest Jehovah's Witness. Like I was, you know, the idea
Good
of
for you. I wish I'd have been the laziest Jehovah's Witness. It would have saved me a lot of time. Yeah.
I think looking back, I was really lucky that I was raised in a family where when I was a kid, my dad was inactive a lot and my mum was always active, but I was not raised in one of these sort of high pressure environments where it was like, you're going to leave school at 16, you will pioneer. That was not, it was not like that at all. And my parents didn't really ever put any pressure on me about doing anything. I was kind of left to my own devices a lot of the time. So I always hated the ministry. I hated it. I hated getting dressed up like I'm going to a wedding and like putting on tights every day and going out and then knocking on doors and no one would be in, or I'd be paired with someone, because of course I had no choice over really who I worked with. I'd be paired with someone that I really didn't want to work with. And it was just this forced association the whole time. And I would describe myself as an extroverted introvert. So I can seem outgoing and I can be outgoing, but essentially deep down, I kind of like my own space. I like living my own life how I want it. I like seeing people, but if I go to a party, then the next 2 days I need to just not see anyone at all. I need to kind of recover a bit. And obviously the witness world is go, go, go. It's constantly meetings ministry. And I didn't really love that. So I was like 4 hours a month on the ministry, bare minimum, like put a report in. And I remember once at the congregation that I was in, the elders did this thing where every March time, so the memorial season, they'd go around and they'd try and get as many people as possible to pioneer. And it was like a statistic that made them look good with their CO, their circuit overseer. And so they'd come around and they'd be like, so Jodie, you're going to pioneer this month, yeah? And I'd just look at them and think, I don't even do 10 hours on the ministry. Why are you trying to get me to do 50? Because at the time it was still 50, I think. It changed, 10 years ago to 30 or something. But it just...
Coming down.
It's coming down, yeah. It just struck me as just... I remember that lodging in my brain and thinking, it's all about statistics. I mean, surely really the thing to do would be to say, Jodie, you're always doing 4, maybe 5 hours a month on the ministry. Why don't you try and hit 10 for memorial season? We're all going to pioneer. Why don't you just try and double it? But it was all about meeting this specific number. So it was all about quantity rather than quality. And that that always irked me. I just thought, well, what's the point in all this then? It's not really about the truth of it and making something better. It's about being seen to be out. It's about being seen to have the numbers. And my husband, his family were always very active. His dad was an elder, but he wasn't the kind of person who was like, I need to reach out, I need to do this. I think we just thought, we're in it. And we were active, we went along, but we were bare minimum people.
Were you ever in a situation where you needed to wear a head covering?
No, but I would never have done it. I always found that, and there's a scene of that in Oh Sister. I always found that utterly ridiculous. Yeah. There would be a circuit overseer, there would be a circuit assembly where there was someone in the congregation who was deaf, and so someone had to not just sign, but they read it out. So behind, the brother would be on the platform and they would be doing the talk, and then the person would be reading it. And for a while, at first, they didn't have a covering on the head. It was always a sister who was doing it. It was never a man. And then someone decided, no, she really should be wearing something. So she'd start wearing a hat, in the middle of the circuit assembly. And it would just irritate me so much, because I would just think, well, there's plenty of men here that could stand up and do that job. Like, it's not as if, surely, I mean, I don't agree with the rule anyway, but surely if you do the rule, it's because there's no brother present that is able to do it. But we're in a hall here of 1,000 people. There's plenty of men that could stand there and do this, but they don't want to do it. So yeah, I was always the person, and actually I did have a rep as a sister with opinions, because I was that person. Yeah. People were just like, okay, all right, whatever, Jodie. But they would, it was little rules like that I just didn't get. And I remember once when they still had the group, I wore trousers to the group. And someone said to me, oh, have you just come from work? I said, no. And they were like, oh. And this was at someone's house, sitting in their living room. And
That's
I was wearing...
really rebellious, wearing
It's
trousers
so rebellious.
Yeah.
But they were pinstriped business suit trousers. So they were smart. I was not wearing torn jeans or anything like that. But no, I was a Jezebel. Lloyd, I was a Jezebel.
There are two things in what you've just said there that I really relate to. First of all, when you were talking about someone being on the stage who has been maybe foisted on the congregation as a visiting speaker from another congregation, and that they're just completely lacking in any kind of charisma, and they're just mouthing off with their opinions, and it's incredibly dull. And you're thinking, I'd prefer to go out on the street and just grab a random member of the public and have them come on the stage than listen to this fossil who's been put here purely because, like you say, the elders in his congregation don't have the guts to tell him that he's not a good speaker. Yeah. I relate to that. I actually think that that's a major Achilles heel in the organization, that they don't allow women to give talks and present information. Interestingly, I think for a couple of years when they were doing the promo video for the convention, they had it narrated by a woman, almost as if to say, hey, expect to hear women talking, when of course that wasn't going to happen. But I actually think that if women were allowed to give talks, and especially if they were allowed to present, let's say, JW Broadcasting episodes, the material would be so much more compelling, because they would be chosen on merit, and they would be chosen based on their skills. And I would have way more work to do in unpicking the nonsense than if you have someone like Harold Corkin almost dying on the desk, trying to kind of breathe life into a subject when he just cannot help being dull. I relate to that, and I also relate to the excruciating feeling of being asked to work with someone in the preaching work who you don't want to work with. And just a little anecdote, I used to try and alleviate some of that boredom by just being silly every now and then. And once I was working with this sweet old dear who used to pray about basically everyone in her life that she knew of. And she came to, she was just kind of doing small talk one day, and she was like, oh, so how's your sister? I'm not going to say my sister's name. How's your sister, Lloyd? Oh, she's not so good, Anne, I'm afraid. Oh, no, what's wrong with your sister? She's fallen in a hole. And because I knew she was a little bit, not quite there, I knew that she'd fall for it, but I forgot to correct her later. So she was like, oh, no. Oh, that's terrible. Oh, she's in a hole. Yeah, she's in a hole. And I forgot to kind of later on in the day say, by the way, Anne, I was joking. My sister's not really in a hole. I was just feeling a bit silly. And the next day, she came to me and she said, your sister's been in my prayers. I hope she gets out of that hole.
Oh, bless her. Oh, bless her.
So she'd actually prayed about it. But that was kind of I feel bad about it now, but that was kind of my sense of humor. I was just so bored out of my mind.
Yeah.
That's the sort of silly stuff I used to do just to kind of amuse myself. But what a crazy world we lived in, and I'm so grateful to you for bringing some of that to life with your book. I really cannot plug it enough. It's again available as of today, so April 13th. Where can people find it?
So if you're in the UK, it should be available everywhere. So you can get it through, obviously, Amazon, Waterstones, local independent bookshop. It is being translated, so it's coming out. So Another Life was translated into German, and this one is also being translated into German. Another Life was also in Polish, Russian, Italian, and Spanish. If you're in America, it's not available directly in America as of yet. So it would probably be a case of purchasing from, I know there's Book Depository that ships to the US free, but also maybe from UK Amazon as well.
Yeah, there'll be UK Amazon, or I would imagine most larger bookstores might have some kind of facility for ordering books from other countries.
Yeah,
and that's what I have to do here in Croatia. If basically Croatia, most of the books that I'm interested in aren't stocked here. If you're a fan of Jordan Peterson, it's wall to wall Jordan Peterson in my local bookshop, but.
Interesting.
For almost anything else, I have to order it and wait for a month. But
wow, okay.
Yeah, just because many of the people watching this video will be in America. Can I give the ISBN number? That might help.
Yeah, maybe. I think so.
ISBN 9780241 456958. because that might help with ordering it. And also, one thing that I encourage people to do when it comes to books like this is go to your local library and ask and request for it to be added to the library stock, because that way it can be read by anyone in the community, including Jehovah's Witnesses. They could conceivably go to the library and maybe hide it behind another book, and it can be of use in that way. So please do hunt down a copy of this amazing book. Jodie, if there's anyone watching who has been in this world that you describe and is on the fence as to whether it's worthwhile breaking free from this controlling environment, what would be your advice?
I think it's hard. I always feel like it's terrible. I'm terrible at giving advice. I feel like it's such a kind of personal thing. I really love the doctor, he's a psychotherapist, Gabor Mate, he's huge now. He did an interview with Prince Harry, and I've been watching his videos for a few years, and they've been amazing really at helping me sort of shelve a lot of my pain that I felt at losing certain relationships with people when I did fade out. And he said about how with this kind of scenario, he said that you have two choices, that you can either choose to remain in whatever you're in, whatever painful scenario you're in, but you will feel the pain of not being your authentic self, of really being who you are. Or you can choose to be your authentic self, but you will probably still feel pain at losing those attachments. Because when we're young, our two core needs are authenticity and attachment. And we learn as we get older to stifle our authenticity in order to maintain our attachment, because it's very hard for both to coexist. And then as we get older, it's then that we have this sort of reckoning where we want to follow our authenticity, but we have to be aware that if we do that, we will still feel pain from losing those attachments. So I think to anyone who's at that point, it's not easy. You will feel pain. And every now and again, there is a day, and I still have it. Every now and again, I have a day where I just feel really down in the dumps. I feel really sad. And I think about the people who I love, who I don't have in my life anymore, and I really miss them. And I kind of allow myself to have a day where I feel miserable, and I cry, I listen to sad music. Like I get it all out, because those feelings are important. It's a part of the grieving process, and you have to listen to it. And I do it because I say to myself, get it out now, feel those feelings, because tomorrow you'll feel better. And without a doubt, I always feel better. And for so long, it felt like the organisation, my life as a witness, was this massive mountain that was overshadowing my life. And I couldn't see how I could get around it. It was just so big and dominant. And day after day, time passed. I was doing my writing. I was losing myself in other things. I was being distracted. And then it got to the point where I was able to then look over my shoulder. And what I had seen as this huge mountain had receded in the distance so much, and it was just a dot. And that's kind of how I feel now. It doesn't overshadow me in the way that it did, because time's a great healer, and I've made so much progress now in my life and living my life how it feels right to me, for me and my children, that it's not a mountain, it's a tiny dot in the distance. So I think that anyone who's unsure of what to do, it's up to you whether or not you stay in it. I don't think leaving is always right for everyone. I think it depends on your personality type and if you have connections outside of that world. But I think you just have to really, I think you have to accept, it sounds really depressing, but you have to accept there's going to be pain, whichever choice you make. But in a way, that is life, isn't it? I mean, there is no life that is free from pain. So that's not very hopeful, is it? Sorry.
And on that positive ending, no, it's true. You're keeping it real for us, which is really important. So, Jodie, I've really enjoyed our conversation. best of luck with your amazing novel, Oh Sister, out now as of April 13th. And I look forward to seeing you continue to thrive as the wonderful writer that you are.
Thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed our chat.
So viewers, I hope you've enjoyed this interview. Don't forget that you can subscribe and see more interviews. But for now, that's all we have time for. Thank you so much for watching.